We live in a time where accountability is a buzzword thrown around like candy at a parade, but somehow the clowns throwing it are the ones running the circus. From the left's perpetual outrage machine to political pundits pretending to care about the people while cashing checks bigger than their egos, we're stuck in a reality show where no one seems to know the rules, but everyone wants to be the star. And through all this, one thing is apparent: the left has an uncanny ability to project their flaws onto others with the precision of a NASA engineer and the emotional range of a Hallmark movie villain. We've got cries about President Musk like the man's actually plotting world domination and not just tweeting through it. Meanwhile, California Democrats are apparently so loyal they'd vote for a wet sock if they had the right logo. And don't even get me started on the moral pretzels some folks twist themselves into over justice. 3 years in jail for stepping on the wrong patch of grass, but if you're firebombing a police station, well, context matters. All that being said, let's start out with everyone's favorite congressional ghoul, Connecticut Representative Rosa Delauro.
Now, all of a sudden, we have an outside influence who believes, I think he is president, and that's President Musk, who has not elected, has no authority, and trying to really upend what the services are to the American people.
Delauro gives off the vibe that if you spilled a glass of water on her, she'd morph into a gremlin and blow through $1 trillion before sunrise. Let's unpack Delauro's rambling proclamation about President Musk, shall we? First off, it's rich, pun fully intended, for someone like her to talk about upending services for the American people when she's been parked in Congress for 33 years, with little to show for besides her multi-million-dollar net worth. Yes, you heard that right, folks. Delauro's congressional salary is around $174,000 a year, yet she somehow amassed a fortune north of $10 million. Either she's the greatest investor of our time, or she's a glaring walking advertisement for what's wrong with Washington. Spoiler alert, it's the latter. Now, Delauro is a textbook example of the swamp in D.C., career politicians who cling to power for decades while the rest of the country deals with skyrocketing inflation, stagnant wages, and broken systems. She talks about serving the American people, but the only people benefiting from her tenure seem to be herself and her wealthy donors. And that's why we need term limits more than ever. These lifers in Congress are so far removed from the struggles of ordinary Americans, they might as well be living on another planet. How can someone who's been ensconced in power for over 3 decades, who enjoys the perks of a 6-figure taxpayer funded salary and a cozy retirement package possibly relate to a single mom working 2 jobs or the veteran struggling to get by? Now let's call out the Democrats' playbook here because it's as predictable as it is pathetic. Why are they suddenly fixating on Elon Musk, calling him President Musk, and pretending he's single-handedly dismantling democracy? Simple. They've run out of mileage attacking Trump. Trump's approval numbers are holding strong, and it's no longer politically beneficial to attack him relentlessly. After all, he's already served a first term, he can't go up for re-election, and for many Americans, he's more of a political rock star than a threat. The left knows this, so they're pivoting onto their next target, Musk. Why Musk? Because he's influential, outspoken, and most importantly, outside their control. His ownership of X stripped away the left's monopoly on the digital town square, exposing bias, censorship, and collusion with government agencies. They can't let that stand. So the new strategy is clear. Smear him to reduce his credibility and influence. Musk isn't a politician, but he's a cultural force, and they're terrified by that. By framing him as some unelected overlord, they hope to discredit him enough that people tune out of his opinions, especially on platforms like X, where the powers that be no longer buckle to their governmental pressures. Now, this isn't about democracy or protecting the American people. It's about silencing dissent and maintaining control. They tried this with Trump, but his popularity and resilience have made him nearly untouchable to their attacks. Now they're using the same tired tactics on Musk, twisting his words, attributing motives he doesn't have, and painting him as a villain for simply refusing to play by their rules. The irony is thick. The very people accusing Musk of undermining democracy are the same ones trying to censor him because he's giving people a platform to speak freely. This isn't just an attack on Musk, it's an attack on anyone who dares to challenge the narrative. And if they think the strategy will work, they're as out of touch as Delauro's net worth compared to her salary. The American people are waking up to this game, and no amount of hand-waving about President Musk is going to change that. And up next, the sequel you didn't know you needed. Gremlins in Congress Part 2, The Spending Strikes Back. Because just when you thought it couldn't get any wilder, Delauro's back with more chaotic energy, more out-of-control spending, and even fewer facts. So brace yourselves, folks. This one's got all the drama, none of the accountability, and a plot twist that'll make your wallet cry.
We are on the cusp of an agreement to move this country forward. But 2 days ago, a multi-billionaire with apparently no working knowledge of our government or of appropriation, someone who was a self-appointed president of the United States, Elon Musk, issued a marching order for House Republicans to go against their own elected leadership. Shut down the government. Shut down the government. House Republicans are responsible for any harm and uncertainty brought upon the American people. And should some get their wish for a month-long government shutdown, they will be responsible for cleaning up their mess come Inauguration Day.
Wait a second, I knew I'd recognized her. Delauro's the troll doll that escaped from my 6th grade backpack. You know, those little keychain ones millennials used to carry around. Yeah, I'm old, folks. But look, the hair, the chaos, it all checks out. And now she's out here obsessing over Musk like she's casting spells. I swear, any minute now she'll start waving her tiny wand and chanting, "Twitteras and deletas." Somebody please zip her back into a pocket where she belongs. Anyway, let's dissect her argument piece by piece, starting with the absurd claim that Musk issued a marching order for House Republicans to shut down the government. This is a classic example of a straw man. Delauro is attributing intent and power to Musk that simply doesn't exist. Musk expressed his opinions on social media, which, last I checked, is still protected under the First Amendment. But Delauro and her colleagues twist this into some kind of hostile coup, as though Musk is sitting in the Capitol with a gavel instead of running Tesla and SpaceX. Also, need I remind you folks that Elon is part of Trump's cabinet, and Trump, last I checked, isn't even in office yet. So it's not like there's anything he can actually even do outside of tweet. Anyway, the argument also reeks of an appeal to authority, with Delauro suggesting Musk has no right to voice his thoughts because he allegedly lacks working knowledge of our government or appropriations. First off, Musk's education in economics and physics, combined with his success running multi-billion-dollar companies, make him arguably more qualified than most career politicians who've never managed so much as a lemonade stand. Secondly, voicing criticism of government inefficiency doesn't require a PhD in political science. In fact, it's something every American citizen has the right to do. Yes, even billionaires. Then there's a glaring omission of context. The government shutdowns we've seen in recent years are rarely the result of unilateral decisions by one party or individual. They stem from broader failures in negotiation and compromise, something Congress, including Delauro, is supposed to excel at. But instead of acknowledging the dysfunction on both sides, she conveniently scapegoats Musk. Now let's make this clear. This isn't about protecting the American people. It's about deflecting responsibility and vilifying someone outside their political bubble. And let's not ignore the scare tactic here. Delauro ominously warns that House Republicans are responsible for any harm and uncertainty brought upon the American people, as if the left has no part in the gridlock. She completely sidesteps the fact that Democrats often dig in their heels on spending bills, refusing to budge on policies that are anything but bipartisan. If anyone is playing politics with the American people's lives, it's the career politicians who've turned government shutdowns into a bargaining chip. Finally, Delauro creates a false dichotomy by painting the situation as though Republicans must either follow her party's demands or face complete moral and practical failure. There's no room in her narrative for negotiation, compromise, or even the possibility that Musk's critique might have a grain of truth. It's all black and white, us versus them, because nuance doesn't win headlines, and it certainly doesn't energize her base. So here's the reality. Elon Musk didn't shut down the government. Congress's inability to manage a budget did. Blaming a billionaire for expressing an opinion is not just lazy, it's insulting to the intelligence of the American people. Delauro's rant isn't a defense of democracy, it's a defense of the status quo. One where career politicians like her dodge accountability and point fingers at anyone who challenges their power. If anyone's marching orders need questioning, it's the ones keeping these lifelong bureaucrats in office.
The world's richest man, reaping billions in government contract, is calling the shots in the Republican Party.
Is it just me, or does Delauro give off serious witch vibes? You know, like the one hunched over a cauldron muttering about Musk while tossing taxpayer dollars into the pot? I swear, if you take a moment and you listen closely, you can almost hear her chanting, debt ceiling, toil and trouble. Let's make this deficit double. Anyway, indeed, we are in unprecedented times, just not in the way Delauro wants you to believe. Her claim that Elon Musk, a private citizen, somehow derailed a bipartisan bicameral bill destined to save the day is as laughable as it is misleading. Musk shared his thoughts on X, a social media platform, not exactly the same as vetoing legislation or whipping votes on the House floor. If Congress is so fragile that a tweet can completely derail a deal, perhaps the problem isn't Musk, but the lawmakers lacking the backbone to stand by their supposed principles. Now let's talk about this bipartisan bill Delauro is so eager to defend. It's 1,500 pages of deficit spending. More of the same bloated, pork-filled nonsense that keeps driving us deeper into debt. America isn't just flirting with financial disaster. We're diving headfirst into it. The national debt recently surpassed $33 trillion, according to the U.S. Treasury, and the Congressional Budget Office warns that interest payments alone could outpace discretionary spending within a decade. Expecting some budget cuts to address this mess isn't just reasonable, it's essential for our survival as a solvent nation. But Delauro doesn't want to hear it. This is the same person who just yesterday was calling to abolish the debt ceiling, a guardrail against unlimited borrowing, and demanding funding to make crash test dummies more equitable. That's right, equitable crash test dummies. Meanwhile, working families are crushed under the weight of inflation, and middle-class taxpayers are left footing the bill for Congress's reckless spending spree. So spare us a lecture about working families and vulnerable families. Delauro's pandering is as transparent as her legislative priorities are ridiculous. She paints this bill as a lifeline for middle-class Americans, but what she's really defending is a swamp. Her biggest concern isn't passing meaningful legislation. It's getting something through so she can head back home for the holidays and dangle a symbolic carrot in front of her constituents to make it look like she's been working for them over in D.C. In reality, her career in Congress has been more about enriching herself, just look at her multi-million-dollar net worth, than about solving problems for the families she claims to represent. And let's not forget her rhetorical sleight of hand here, okay? She frames the bill as on its way to passing, conveniently ignoring how often legislation stalls or gets gutted in the final hours. Blaming Musk for stopping a done deal is not only false, it's absurd. If the bill was so crucial, why didn't her party rally the votes to push it through? The reality is that Delauro's breathless hand-wringing is just another example of partisan theatrics, designed to shift blame and distract from Congress's chronic inability to manage the country's finances responsibly. All right, let's jump back in and see what else Delauro is stirring in her cauldron. Is she brewing up another batch of magical nonsense, muttering Musk's name, hoping he disappears? Let's see what kind of spell she's trying to cast this time.
The world's richest man, reaping billions in government contract, is calling the shots in the Republican Party. At the behest of the world's richest man, who no one voted for, the United States Congress has been thrown into pandemonium. It leads you to the question of who is in charge. I thought that there was a Republican majority in this body, not a President Musk majority.
At this point, Delauro isn't just giving witch, troll, or gremlin vibes anymore. She's basically Vecna in a purple wig, leading the Stranger Things monsters in a chaotic quest for congressional mayhem. Honestly, if Congress had a costume party, she'd win unopposed. I mean, she's already in character. In fact, she's so deep in the role, it's like Robert Downey Jr. in Tropic Thunder, stuck in the part of career politician and oblivious to how ridiculous it all looks. Okay, now let's start out by looking at Delauro's pearl clutching over Musk's government contracts. Yes, SpaceX and Tesla have received federal funding. SpaceX has been awarded nearly $15 billion in contracts since its inception, but this funding isn't handed out on whims. It's tied to bids, performance, and outcomes. SpaceX, for example, saved NASA an estimated $500 million per crewed mission compared to previous programs, according to the agency itself. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense has called SpaceX a critical partner in national security operations. So while Delauro wants to frame Musk as some parasitic contractor, the data tells a different story. SpaceX delivers results that benefits taxpayers, unlike the countless examples of wasteful government spending her party conveniently ignores. Now let's talk about the rhetorical sleight of hand happening here as well. Delauro frames Musk as an unelected president to stoke fears of unchecked influence. But here's the thing. Nobody voted for Musk because nobody needed to. He's a private citizen exercising his right to free speech, not a politician bypassing the ballot box to seize power. Meanwhile, unelected bureaucrats and lobbyists exert far more control over government policy than a tech mogul with an X account. In fact, in 2022 alone, lobbying expenditures in the U.S. government reached nearly $4 billion, with pharmaceutical and tech companies leading the pack. Yet Delauro has no problem turning a blind eye to that influence while handpicking Musk as her scapegoat. Further, the irony of Delauro invoking the Republican majority as if her own party hasn't played a role in congressional dysfunction is rich. The federal government has been operating on a deficit for over 20 years, and the consequences are barreling towards us. By 2033, according to the Congressional Budget Office, interest payments on the national debt will surpass defense spending, becoming the single largest line item on the federal budget. Both parties bear responsibility for this looming disaster, but career politicians like Delauro, who've been in office for decades, are uniquely culpable. Instead of addressing these systemic issues, she distracts with theatrical finger-pointing at Musk, a man whose primary crime seems to be existing outside of her sphere of control. So who's really in charge? Here's a hint. It's not Elon Musk. It's career politicians like Delauro who spent decades building the swamp while pretending to champion the very people they've ignored. If Congress is in pandemonium, she might want to take a long, hard look at her own role in the dysfunction before pointing fingers at a man with an X account. Maybe instead of demonizing success, she could focus on delivering some herself. Anyway, moving on from one horror show to the next, we now venture into the Young Turks, where Kasparian reacts to the idea of Kamala Harris running for California governor with the same terror Jamie Lee Curtis had when she first spotted Michael Myers. Let's dive into this meltdown.
I think Kamala Harris will probably win in a cakewalk for governor.
No!
Okay.
No! What are you doing? What are you doing?
No, I'm telling you the reality, whether you like it or not.
What are you doing?
Democratic voters in California love to obey. And so
oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I'm gonna move, Cenk. I'm gonna quit my job. I'm gonna quit my job and I'm gonna move.
I'm not saying I'm in favor of it. I'm telling you what's like if the Democratic Party said, we anoint Kamala Harris, a giant percentage of Democrats in California would go, yes, we obey. We will take the loyalty oath. It doesn't matter how bad she is.
This state cannot survive another incompetent Democrat leading it.
Leading it. Democrat like Kamala.
No, we just can't. Okay, like anyway, so like people are egging her on. Okay, apparently she's like in a wait and see mode. How about you wait and see like your way out of public life and go do what you're supposed to do. Go work in the private sector, go do the lobbying thing, whatever it is, but do not run as governor of California. Yeah. Do not.
Anna's reaction to the idea of Kamala Harris running for governor is like that moment in A Nightmare when you realize Freddy Krueger's in it. She's practically screaming, oh my God, Cenk, wake me up! And honestly, who can blame her? California doesn't need another sequel in this horror franchise. It's already terrifying enough. Now, this dynamic between Anna and Cenk in this clip is the perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with the Democrat Party. On one side, you've got Cenk calmly laying out the grim reality of how the party operates, business as usual, rubber stamp loyalty, and a base so predictable they'd probably vote for a potted plant if the party told them to. On the other side, Anna's having a full-blown meltdown, realizing that this strategy is sinking the party and driving voters away. And honestly, she's got a point. Now, the idea of Kamala Harris running for governor in California isn't confirmed, but the mere suggestion highlights a major issue. The state is already in crisis under Democrat rule. California has been dominated by Democrats for over a decade, with every statewide office held by the party since 2011 and a supermajority in the state legislature since 2018. During this time, the state has seen its homeless crisis worsen dramatically, and according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, California's homeless population increased by 26% over 5 years, from approximately 150,000 in 2018 to nearly 190,000 in 2023. Now, this despite $25 billion over the same 5-year period spent to combat homelessness. A state audit in 2024 revealed that a large portion of this funding was poorly tracked or entirely unaccounted for, with little evidence that it made a meaningful impact on reducing homelessness. Instead, cities like Los Angeles, where I live, saw homelessness increase, and major urban areas remain overwhelmed with encampments, open drug use, and sanitation crises. Now, this failure is a part of a broader pattern of mismanagement. Violent crime in California rose by 6% in 2022, including a 10% increase in robberies and an 8% rise in aggravated assaults, according to the Public Policy Institute of California. Meanwhile, the energy grid continues to buckle under the strain of aggressive renewable energy mandates, with the California Independent System Operator warning of rolling blackouts during peak demand. And let's not forget the mass exodus. Over 500,000 residents left California between 2020 and 2023, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, fleeing unaffordable housing, skyrocketing taxes, and declining quality of life. This is a track record of one-party rule. Soaring homelessness, rising crime, an unstable energy grid, and a middle class that's voting with its feet. The notion that California should double down on this failure by elevating Kamala Harris, whose leadership record is lackluster at best, is a grim joke. If Democrats don't wake up to the reality of their policies, they'll find themselves not just losing support, but watching their own party infrastructure crumble under the weight of their failures. Anyway, moving on to Tim Pool and Luke Beasley squaring off on Tim's show over January 6th, with Tim ripping apart the narrative like Leatherface tearing limbs in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
No,
right,
I
so
haven't.
no, stop. You don't know anything about these January 6 cases. You don't know why these people are in jail. You don't know that a man is in Brooklyn right now for 3 years without charge or trial. And when Donald Trump says these people have been held for too long, you say, no, Trump is wrong. Keep them locked up. That's fucking fascist. Dude, you've been sitting here with no knowledge of the specifics of some of these cases. There is a man in Brooklyn right now, I'm gonna say it again, no charges whatsoever brought, and he's been in jail for 3 fucking years. For you to sit there and say it is good that he remains locked up is fascism. That is saying the hierarchical system of the courts and the government is just, and the process is all that matters. And I am saying perhaps 3 years is enough, because I actually have moral logic and an understanding of these cases. Hence, my position on January 6th has always been the people who have attacked police must go to prison. But 3 years is a fucking long time for assault on an officer. We have seen people on the far left, notably when they were firebombing shit all across Minnesota, 33 people murdered. And how many criminal charges do we get for this? When they firebombed a police station and forced the police to evacuate. On May 29th, 2020, when thousands of far leftists firebombed the White House grounds and set fire to St. John's Church and injured 100 police officers, how many fucking people went to prison for 3 years? How many of them who never showed up on that day are in prison for 20 years?
I think it's safe to say Luke got sliced apart by facts. Anyway, Tim's level of indignation here is entirely justified, because when it comes to protests and riots, it's always rules for thee, but not for me with the left. For example, in 2020, we witnessed the George Floyd riots spiral into nationwide chaos, causing an estimated $2 billion in damages, according to the Insurance Information Institute, making it the most expensive civil unrest in U.S. history. Cities like Minneapolis were left practically unrecognizable, with entire blocks burned to the ground. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, these riots spread to 140 U.S. cities, with violence and destruction becoming the norm for months. And let's not forget, over 19 lives were lost, according to a report by Axios, while businesses and communities were left in ruins. Now, this wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged. Many Democrat leaders justify the violence as necessary or understandable, cloaking it under the guise of righteous anger. Arrests were minimal, and even when rioters were detained, prominent Democrats stepped in to help them. According to NPR, former Democrat presidential candidate herself, Kamala Harris, promoted a bail fund that helped release rioters, ensuring they faced little to no consequences for their actions. Now compare that to January 6th. You have protests where, according to congressional testimony from FBI Counterterrorism Assistant Director Jill Sanborn, at least 40 undercover FBI agents were present at the Capitol. This isn't speculation, it's a fact, directly admitted during official hearings. This raises serious questions about how much of the chaos was organic versus how much was encouraged or enabled to serve a narrative against Donald Trump. Now let's compare that to January 6th. You have a protest where, according to congressional testimony from FBI Counterterrorism Assistant Director Jill Sanborn, at least 40 undercover FBI agents were present at the Capitol. Now, this isn't speculation, it's a fact, directly admitted during official hearings. This raises serious questions about how much of the chaos was organic versus how much was encouraged or enabled to serve a narrative against Donald Trump and his supporters. And yet those on the right are being punished as though they orchestrated the apocalypse. People who simply walked into the Capitol, often through open doors, are facing years in prison. Take the man in Brooklyn who has been held for 3 years without trial. 3 years of his life gone without much of a formal charge. According to Amnesty International, indefinite detention without trial is considered a violation of human rights. But apparently, that standard doesn't apply here. Contrast that with the George Floyd riots. According to the Bureau of Justice statistics, fewer than 15% of those arrested during the riots faced any serious legal consequences. When far-left rioters firebombed the Minneapolis police precinct, and where were the years-long investigations? When over 100 officers were injured and St. John's Church near the White House was set on fire on May 29, 2020, where were the lengthy prison sentences? The double standard is glaring. Now, needless to say, this isn't justice. It's about weaponizing the justice system to punish political enemies while shielding favored groups. The left's rioters can destroy cities, assault officers, and cause billions in damages with impunity, while Trump supporters who were clearly manipulated into acting are treated like domestic terrorists. The people who attacked police on January 6th deserve punishment, but holding individuals for 3 years without trial for misdemeanor level offenses, that's not justice, it's political retribution. Now, the hypocrisy is as obvious as it is infuriating. If Democrats truly cared about justice, they'd hold their own accountable with the same vigor they weaponize against their opponents. Instead, we get a system where ideology dictates punishment, and that, folks, is the real fascism.
Enrique Tarrio wasn't even in D.C. on January 6th, and you are saying that man who his only crime was, quote, don't leave. That's his only crime. You think he should be in prison for 20 years because you're a fascist. You don't care what the facts are. You don't care if this is unjust. You only care that the machine state has decreed you are not to be locked up. And this is the problem I have with the left. They don't know the facts. They don't care about the facts. They view morality as a blanket government stroke of the pen, and every person, regardless of their crime, should be in prison for decades. I reject it outright. The people who fought cops should go to prison. They did. It's been 3 years. But when you've got people who are on misdemeanor charges for having walked into a building at 4 p.m. after the riot, and I know some of these people, they walked into a building for 2 minutes and walked out, and they got 18 months for that. I don't see you defending the innocent people who walked onto a public grass at a public building after a riot had been completed. You don't know. You don't care. You've taken a tribal position and people are suffering because of it. Now you say that Donald Trump saying the injustice that we've seen warrants commutation or pardons. You say that means he's advocating for violence. This is the ultimate problem. Then you cite a press release from Maryland saying, but the right's more violent. There is a distinction between a white supremacist as a right-wing group and a run-of-the-mill Christian conservative who showed up on that day not to protest. Let's talk about Brandon Strzok. He never went in the building. He was on the other side of the building. There was a
pretty fascinating to watch Luke furrow his brow and quietly absorb the facts as Tim breaks down the narrative he's been pushing. You have to wonder what's going through his mind as Tim rips apart his arguments piece by piece. Now, on a macro scale, this moment is emblematic of a much bigger shift because the left can no longer shut down these debates with their usual tactics. For years, anyone who defended any sort of position that went contrary to the left's narrative was labeled a Nazi sympathizer or a conspiracy theorist. But now, those labels don't carry the weight they once did. The left's go-to insults are falling flat, and it's becoming clear they're losing their grip on the conversation. Now, I think it goes without saying that this is a huge sign of the left collapsing within itself. They can't just deflect, misrepresent, and resort to name-calling anymore. The rhetoric of labeling people as extremists or right-wing radicals isn't working when actual facts are being laid out in front of them. It's hilarious, really. The same party that claims to fight for the working class is now justifying political prisoners. The same people who railed against Guantanamo Bay are now silent while Americans are locked up without trial, some for simply walking into a public building. The left just can't ignore the facts anymore. Truth is, the left just can't ignore the facts anymore.
Let's talk about Brandon Strzok. He never went in the building. He was on the other side of the building. There was a permitted protest. He walked up the stairs and he was yelling. They put this guy in prison. There is Owen Schroyer, who was at a permitted rally, who was yelling death to communists. They put him in prison and specifically cited his speech. My dude, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's fine. I get it. We try to be polite. We try to be nice. But there are so many young liberals who sit here and say, the corporate press told me that these people are bad and the machine state government has decreed it by pen. So I don't care what crime they committed. I don't care what the jury said. I don't care who was on the jury. Enrique Tarrio, who was not there, should be in prison for 2 decades. Tell me this now. Why is Enrique Tarrio in prison?
Yeah, so they uncovered with him his plot to overthrow the government.
Enrique Tarrio?
Yeah, and his organization.
What plot? Who's they? Give me some
prosecutors.
Give me some fucking data. Stop squinting at me and saying the prosecutors did a thing. You didn't know. You didn't read it. You didn't read the court papers. All you know is the fascist machine state told you he should be in prison, and you're saying yes to them.
All right, quick recap, folks. This was Luke at the beginning of this clip, and this was Luke at the end of the clip. Wonder where that smile went. Here's the thing. How much longer are we going to let the left keep pretending they have the moral high ground? They've spent years getting away with hypocrisy, ignoring facts, and shoving their agenda down our throats. But now it's all falling apart, baby. The left has lost the narrative, and they know it. Instead of engaging in real conversations, they're throwing tantrums, trying to cling to power while using the same tired tactics that don't work anymore. From the chaos they cheer on in the streets to the authoritarian tendencies they're now fully embracing, it's clear They can't even hold on to their own credibility, let alone the trust of the American people. How long are we going to let them gaslight us into believing they still stand for anything other than power and control? Needless to say, people are starting to wake up to the fact that they've been fed a bunch of lies and distractions, and they're not buying it anymore. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.